Somewhere in a British workshop in the late 1960s, a mechanic is standing in front of a Bedford TK with a spanner in his hand, peering at a cab that looks like it should lift open. Every visual indication tells him it will. Every American truck magazine at the time was praising tilt cab, which is evident in the shape, stance, and way the doors sit against the bonnet line. He reaches for the proper location of the release lever. It doesn't exist. Rather, behind the doors are two tiny hinged flaps. And one of the best-selling trucks manufactured in Britain during the 20th century was ultimately shaped by a single design choice made by Bedford's engineers and obstinately maintained for nearly 30 years. This is the tale of Bedford's refusal to accept the tilt cab and how it hardly slowed them down. You must first comprehend what the Bedford TK was replacing in order to comprehend why this choice was significant. Bedford Vehicles, which was owned by Vauxhall Motors under General Motors at the time, was retiring its outdated S-Type series by 1959. The truck had been the company's mainstay for the majority of the 1950s. The TK range superseded the S-Type in 1959 and would go on to serve as the basis for an amazing variety of adaptations, including fire engines, military vehicles, horseboxes, tippers, and flatbed trucks. This was not a small upgrade. The engine was now tucked directly beneath and behind the driver, rather than out in front under a long bonnet, thanks to a complete forward control redesign that put the driver ahead of the front axle. More load space on the same wheelbase translated into more paying cargo per mile, which was a very tangible benefit for hauliers. When trade journalists saw the TK for the first time in September 1960, they observed something that appeared to be almost contradictory. Bedford's engineers had purposefully decided not to build a tilt cab, even though the cab and chassis layout was exactly what you'd expect on a vehicle built for one. Rather, two hinge panels behind the doors provided access to the engine. These panels could be raised to allow a mechanic to approach the power unit without bending over. Take a moment to visualize that. A form inspired by American tilting trucks, encased in an entirely different ideology. It wasn't a mistake. Every technician in the nation who favored the other option was going to put it to the test. Here's where the narrative gets intriguing, since the reasons for that pick actually made sense if you looked at where the engine sat today. Bedford's own description of the revised range noted that the engine had been set back and placed beneath the seats particularly to increase both driving comfort and power unit accessibility. It wasn't a buried engine. It was near to the surface, almost under the driver and passenger, which meant the two side flaps opened practically straight onto the block, the dipstick, the filters, the injection pump. For the everyday grind of fleet maintenance, checking oil, adjusting timing, topping up coolant, a driver or yard technician didn't need a hydraulic tilt mechanism at all. He needed 30 seconds and a latch. But routine checks were never really the argument. The disagreement was about the large jobs, the engine-out rebuilds, the transmission swaps, the labor that genuinely separated a tilt cab from a fixed one. And this is where Bedford's approach gets almost daring in how differently it tackled the same problem. Rather than creating a cab that pivoted forward, they developed a cab that came off fully. Bedford said the full cab assembly could be raised clear of the chassis in under 30 minutes, and that with expert workers, the task would take little more than an hour. Not a tilt. A full detachment, using overhead lifting gear instead of a hinge and a strut. A TK coming in for significant engine work wasn't a hassle for a facility that was already equipped. It was simply a different Tuesday. This is the portion of the tale that most retrospectives ignore, but it's the part that really explains why this design persisted for so long in spite of complaints. The objections over the fixed cab were legitimate, but they mostly originated from a particular type of workshop that wasn't equipped to remove cabs and was more familiar with a lever and a strut than a chain hoist. According to a retrospective analysis of the TK's engineering, the cab was fixed during a period when tilting cabs were becoming more prevalent, and some maintenance personnel saw that as a real disadvantage of the truck. That criticism never went away. When Bedford created the TK's eventual replacement years later, they essentially acknowledged that a tilt cab had long been viewed as a significant advantage held by their nearest competitor. And there was always that adversary around. For almost 20 years, the Ford D series, which offered the precise tilting cab that Bedford had decided to forego, was located immediately across the market from the TK. When fleet managers were considering which badge to place on their next order, that one feature became a true discussion point and occasionally the deciding factor for workshop foremen comparing the two trucks side by side. Observing things develop decades later, it's simple to believe the TK was losing. The sales numbers present an entirely different picture. Because the Bedford TK did more than just survive in spite of everything, including the missing lever and the objections from the workshop. For 20 years, it was one of the most popular trucks on British highways. The TK, which was manufactured in several versions from 1959 until the early 1990s, sold over 620,000 units, which allowed it to be seen often on British roads for many years. Beneath those two side flaps was a truly versatile selection of power plants, including 4- and 6-cylinder engines that could be powered by gasoline or diesel. This allowed operators to properly tailor the vehicle to their route and budget. Additionally, the design was not limited to Britain. The same fixed cab philosophy was carried across 3 continents by production lines that assembled the TK in Turkey, Australia, and New Zealand. The British Army's logistics fleet used the 4-wheel drive Bedford MK version, which was based on the same basic cab, to transport troops and supplies across terrain that would have destroyed a more sensitive machine. Bedford trusted this fixed cab, flap access concept enough to scale it up rather than replace it, as evidenced by the fact that the eventual bigger sibling, the Bedford Kilometre, relied on the same cab design for trucks rated 16 tons and upwards. When did Bedford give in, then? Not for a while, and even then, just in part. Bedford debuted the TL in 1980. It was primarily based on the TK's chassis and running gear, but it also included a real tilt cab, which was specifically advertised as an enhancement to maintenance access. It wasn't even a clean break. The earlier, less expensive, tiltless design continued to come off the assembly line in tandem for years after the TL was introduced to supplement the TK rather than completely replace it. Despite being criticized for being outdated, the vehicle was still profitable enough to continue manufacturing alongside its own replacement. When the time arrived, it had nothing to do with the taxi. The wider Bedford range, which was still essentially based on that 1960 TK architecture, had simply outgrown the need for a fixed cab by the mid-1980s. In 1986, General Motors decided to close the Dunstable facility, permanently discontinuing the production of Bedford trucks, due to a steep decrease in civilian sales and competitors' advancements in engines, cab comfort, and general technology. The debate about tilt cabs, which had raged in workshops for 20 years, proved to be insignificant in comparison to the larger forces altering the truck business. The Bedford TK's tale truly demonstrates that engineering elegance doesn't always entail imitating the feature that your competitor is promoting the most. After examining the precise location of their engine, Bedford's engineers concluded that 2 flaps and a detachable cab would solve the actual issue without the extra expense and complexity of a tilt mechanism. They then allowed 30 years of sales data support their claims. It was a calculated wager that the majority of operators would prefer a less expensive, more robust, and easier-to-use truck over maintenance provision that they might actually require once or twice a year. That wager paid off for more than 600,000 purchasers in dozens of nations and all types of terrain. Therefore, keep in mind that its immobility wasn't a shortcut the next time you see one of these boxy, upright old Bedfords parked in a scrapyard corner or a farmyard, with a cab positioned just where a hinge should have been. It was a decision that was upheld for almost 30 years based on outcomes rather than arguments. Do you believe Bedford was justified in maintaining their position for such a long time? Or did their obstinacy cost them land they were never able to regain? Please share your thoughts in the comments section.